So today I'm going to talk about processing of plastics. Um, this is an extremely diverse and rich area, both industrially and academically. And I would like to just give a brief overview of how the processing of plastic could be sequenced for various plastics or plastic types. Um, so let me make a graph. So if you understand different kind of plastics, then you have thermoplastics. Thermoplastics are something like engineering plastics um, or commodity plastics such as polypropylene, polyamides, polycarbonate. While on the other hand, you have thermosets, and thermosets are mostly like epoxies where you need a curing agent to cure them. And then finally, if you go down the chain, then you have something out of which polymers are made and typically referred as monomers. And as you know, means an individual um, polymer unit. And then I could also label something like a B stage plastics, and by that I mean um, you definitely need a curing agent or some kind of reaction to happen to complete the polymerization or polymer formation process. And now, on the other hand, I can look into processing, and I can say that there are processing that can happen in fluid regime, and there is a processing type that can happen in melt regime, right? And then you can have processing that could be more of a B stage type activity or process method, which you could label as particulate processing. So you have a particulate processing. And finally, if you are talking about monomers, then in that case, you are basically going to have some kind of a reaction to make the polymer process go forward. And typically, you could involve something like a solution reaction, or one of the common technique is reaction injection molding. So this is more of a high level understanding of polymer processing. Um, but further going down, if you talk about fluid regimes, then I'm looking into something like gravity casting. You know, a typical casting process in metal is nothing but based on gravity, and you let the molten material or fluid material just settle down into the mold. You could have another techniques like melt solution plastisol monomers, right? But on the other hand, I would look into something like solid casting, different castings, right? You could also look into slush casting, right? Roto molding, where you typically use a rotating system, and it is more dependent on centrifugal forces, how they operate in terms of molding. Sheet casting and film casting, sheet casting, film casting, and then you have fiber spinning, If you are really developing fibers, uh, for example, in current time, you would recognize face masks, and these are typically made out of melt-blown fiber spinning technique, right? And then you go into the melt regime, or you have further subdivisions that will show up, right? So the first one could be extrusion, which is a very common technique in polymer processing. You can have injection molding, right? Most of the automotive parts, for example, they are injection molded, right? And then you could have transfer molding, right? And finally, in many cases, you also make parts which are compression molded, very common technique. And you could have even different kind of techniques like below compression molding, for example, bulk molding compound, sheet molding compound, and you name it. If you go into areas like sheet casting, film casting, or fiber spinning, then in these areas, processing techniques, you could mold or you could form bar, section, tube, sheet, film, fiber, even foams and elastomers could be processed here. And finally, you have another regime which could utilize these techniques, and you could call it a rubbery regime, right? Where material is more rubbery in nature, and that's where you start using techniques like calendering and thermoforming stamping, right? So this in short shows you different kind of polymers and how different variety of polymer processing techniques exist. In my next section, I would like to talk more about extrusion technique, and we'll see how one can understand not just from the processing and equipment point of view, but also the fundamental mathematics behind the extrusion, and how it makes parts come out from an extruder. Thank you.